This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Steve Burns. Steve has appeared on this podcast a lot. I enjoy talking to Steve. He has written a ton of books. He has an amazing social media presence. I one day have to figure out how he has achieved his social media presence. Of course, Steve's books, all about trading. So it's an easy conversation for both of us to catch up, see what's going on in America, compare some notes from Asia, and just let it flow. I love these kinds of conversations with people that I've had on the podcast so many times. Without any further delay, let's jump right into my conversation with Steve Burns. I was going through your Twitter feed. You must know this about yourself. As a guy who has written a bunch of trading books, always in the trading space, one of the biggest social media followings in the trading space. I'm sure there's some secret to your madness that you're not going to really reveal to us all. You've got a pretty serious footprint out there, but I've noticed that you are, I don't know if it's a function of age, wisdom, experience. I find when I see your stuff these days, you have a lot more life motivation and life hacks, links and insights these days in your work. You must know this about yourself. My original interest, for the most part, has always been human performance, excellence, what separates people from others and who succeeds and who doesn't. Well, it's amazing. I was thinking about starting other blogs and other websites to cover more success principles. Come to realize like it all ties into trading. The psychology, the discipline, everything that you can have on a success blog or a performance blog, it applies to what a trader needs. Almost in every instance. Trading is life and life is trading. And everybody's a trader, whether they know it or not. Everybody's trading either their time for a paycheck. Some people are trading their ethics for cash, their time with their employer so they can have a bigger house or a brand new car. Everyone's trading something. So I think all the principles come back to trading. So I don't know anything I post, even when it sounds like it's not related to trading, that people couldn't apply it to their lives and trading. There's that speech, and I forget the exact quote because she's a pretty wordy lady, but Ayn Rand has that definition of a trader in Atlas Shrugged. Something to the effect, the trader is the man with morals, with ethics. I'm paraphrasing here. The man that stands on the mountain, the man that's willing to go at it alone, something to that effect. Yeah, that's always one of my favorite quotes, actually. A lot of my trading, too, comes from my love of capitalism and business, everything to do with freedom. Free to choose. Big fan of Milton Friedman, Ayn Rand. Is capitalism and business in general. That's what really got me as a stock trader because I could relate to the businesses behind them more than Forex or future contracts, commodities, other things. That's really what brought me to stocks. Originally was my original love for capitalism. Let me keep you at capitalism and freedom for a moment. I'm going to bounce you around a lot because you're easy to bounce around. You can go in any direction. When I think of freedom these days, in America, you and I are pretty close to the same age, if not the same age, give or take a few years, whatever. I thought one of the cool things growing up in America was this idea that we could talk. If somebody said something that was outrageous, as long as you were not yelling fire in a crowded theater, not being a complete psychopath, you have this great freedom of expressing yourself in America. I'm sure, just like me, you have to think about what you say these days. You have to think about what you post these days. We've been posting stuff online for a long time, both of us. Have you developed a new filtering system, a new way of thinking about this? Do you find yourself thinking about most everything you post? Does it pass the unknown censor filtering system out there by the Borg? Do you find yourself thinking that way these days? I'm an unapologetic capitalist.
And my heroes are people that create businesses, jobs, and products. So I'm unapologetic in capitalism, and I'm nonpartisan. I could care less about choosing a political party and staying with them. I'd much rather choose the issues important to me and what I think is fair and constitutional in every choice I make. The risk reward ratio for discussing any politics in this day and time is terrible. And I don't think there's any value in even getting into or talking about it. If you do have a partisan lean, I think Michael Jordan had a great quote about when they asked him to endorse a Democratic candidate. He said, Republicans buy shoes too. He didn't want to endorse and get involved in all that. And like you said, nowadays it's amazing that almost everyone gets involved in some side of politics.
Even if I press you a little bit, even if I'm not even pushing you to put politics on the table, just in general, as a human being in America in the modern age of 2023, you have to be thinking about what you say because you just don't know what the ramifications are. That great quote from Jordan, maybe he would have gotten hurt from a business perspective, but these days, if you say the wrong thing, I mean, you could get hurt a lot more than just business.
Oh, yeah. It's a different world for sure. It's really amazing to see the country come to where we're at right now with on both sides. I mean, it's disturbing in a lot of ways.
How do you find beyond being smart enough to keep quiet and not pick sides? How do you find yourself? It's self-explanatory for those people that know to move to Florida, not necessarily a political position. There's plenty of different people on different sides in Florida, but Florida is basking in the idea of being a place for freedom and tradition these days. How do you find yourself feeling these days?
I think the best political move anyone can make is to simply move. If it's a political beliefs, whatever that is. I think the best votes are made in where you spend your money, associated with where you live, where you move to. I think that's the best way to vote. Money and movement.
Yeah, I think I win the record for the movement part. I didn't plan it. I still think I win the record. I was just having a conversation with someone this afternoon about a sizzle trailer that I want to make for a project, and it was with a Vietnamese video production team. I was having to share with them the typical mindset that you might hear from the typical American. And the typical American could be my friends and family for all intents and purposes. It's so far away. It's so far away. It's so far away, not only physically, but it's so far away from the imagination. Look, I try to think about myself. My imagination wouldn't have told me anything about Vietnam 10, 15 years ago. My imagination would have said nothing. My imagination would have said Rambo, Forrest Gump. That's it.
Yeah, who would have thought Vietnam would have turned out the way it did? It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Let me pick your mind a little bit about the crowd. The crowd is always the crowd. And we like to always think that the event that's happening right now is terribly unique and terribly interesting and more of something than the prior crowd movement in the prior period. I can think back a few months ago to the Silicon Valley Bank thing, and all hell was supposedly breaking loose, and there was voices screaming on Twitter and this and that, and things come and go. Things always come and go until perhaps, I guess, the perma bears that think that literally the planet's going to burst up into a supernova, I guess. I don't know. But the crowd is always the crowd, isn't it? You got to figure out a way to deal with the crowd, regardless of what year or decade it is. And I'm not so sure, except for the topic, if the crowd ever stops behaving how the crowd behaves.
It seems like the crowd's always doing first order thinking. Perma bears think it's going to crash and everything's going to end. There's second order thinking. What are the politicians going to do to offset that for their own political gain? What are the central banks going to do to offset the crash and to keep their mandate in place? What are the traders going to do? Has everybody already panicked and sold? Is there so much second, third, and fourth order thinking, and so much of the crowd just stays on the first order thinking? That's just a big problem they have. They only see step one. They don't see cause and effect. They don't see what got us to where we are, all the known information everybody's already acted on. It's fascinating. That just repeats over and over again for hundreds of years.
Do you ever find yourself, given to what you know in the experiences you've had, and as we all age, wisdom with age, a lot of people find you at all ages, in all levels of experience. Do you find sometimes as you get more and more wisdom and you maybe, like all of us, have less of a desire to pound the table and say, this is the way it is. You just know how it is. But there's still all those new people out there coming along and trying to cut through the noise and figure out, how do they make decisions? How does it make you feel sometimes? You're kind of like ahead of the curve, so to speak.
Yeah, one thing I've learned from most areas of life is people carry around the mental models. People believe what they believe, and you really are talking to a software program running in their brain, the mental model they've adapted and how they believe the world works. Very few ways to hack and get around what they already believe. All I try to do is share the principles, lessons, history, data. If somebody wants to accept it or not, that's up to them. But all I can do is share principles. I try to stay principle, data oriented in what I've studied, what I've learned, what I've modeled, what I've seen with other people. And one thing I try not to do is argue with anybody, because you're really not arguing with people. You're arguing with the mental model they're running. And that's why politics have gotten so spicy in so many places around the world, is people have chosen what they believe in the way they see the world. Two people can see it in completely opposite ways. And the truth might be in the middle. It's very possible that one has it half right and the other has it half right, but they're unable to meet in the middle anymore and to come to any kind of resolutions. That's what people really lack to understand, is they're trying to have conversations, even if it's about trading, investing. Warren Buffett has no doubt about value investing. He believes it. That's his mental model, period. That's what he learned. That's what he's adapted to. People that are trend followers that have looked at the data and they know that works and have the proof and understand, they see things through that filter. It's very hard to penetrate that filter unless you're using just quantified data and showing somebody something. And most stuff is just based on opinions and predictions and what they like and what they believe. It's incredible, the current Dunning effect, where people are so sure of themselves and they have so little knowledge, is actually what causes them to get on the wrong side of things and stay there, never expand their knowledge base.
I literally recorded a podcast today that will come out before this episode, a monologue of mine, where I talked about the very thing that you just said, literally to the word, almost feeling like this guy's reading my mind. Steve Burns is somehow or another in my mind. I just recorded a monologue today where I was talking about Buffett and trend followers. They both have data. They're both examples to look to. Different people make different choices. And then comparing it to perhaps other strategies or other mindsets where there is no proof, there is no evidence. I'm sitting here just listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, is my room bugged? What's going on here? Is this guy Burns got a camera in here? I better put my pants on.
That's hilarious. And you haven't released yet.
Yeah, you're going to come after me.
One of my favorite quotes is, two successful traders, was it Jim Rogers, that said he's never met a rich technician. A market wizard, Marty Schwartz, wanted to introduce himself to Jim Rogers because he was a very, very wealthy and successful technical analysis to this day. And to top it off, he's a day trader, just like Jim Simmons. Jim Simmons with Renaissance Technology, they run mostly day trading systematic processes. You have even Buffett and Munger finally admitted in one of their talks at Berkshire about the success of Jim Simmons in day trading. He's a math genius and uses incredibly fast technology to do it. The principles behind trading, the risk-reward ratios, the positive expectancy, the edge, the capturing a trend in your time frame, or a fundamental a technical analysis, they're all universal principles. The fact that people can't execute very often the right way doesn't disprove it all. There's always an exception to the rules. So that was fascinating that Jim Rogers doesn't believe in technical analysis, and Marty Schwartz, he was broke as a fundamental analysis. It's funny, there's always another side of it with proof.
Is it Simmons or Simons? I've never actually figured it out. I actually say something similar quite often, which is there are exceptions to the rule. And it's really tough to be a short-term trader, trading at the speed of light and competing against people like Jim Simons. One thing interesting about him, the autobiography that came out about him a couple years ago, the author talked about how Simons was influenced by Richard Dennis and the Turtles. He couldn't figure out initially what they were doing. And that was a big inspiration to him to go down that path. And early on, before I think Simons went really short term, he did make money as a trend following trader. He was going down that path.
It's all about the positive expectancy, the data, and the edge. It's hard to find favorable risk-reward ratios on smaller and smaller time frames. Interesting how well Jim Simons did doing that on such a short time frame. But even the book, just like so many others, he has about a 50% win rate even, and the positive expectancy is in the size of the wins versus the size of the losses. It is fascinating to me how all the trend following principles that you talk about in your trend following book, they apply to all traders, all time frames. Very few, like you said, can have a high win rate and make money without keeping their losses really, really small.
The trick for when people are doing these comparative studies in their mind, okay, I'm going to choose this strategy or I'm going to choose this time frame, is to say, how much time are you willing to give? If somebody goes super short term, as you've just pointed out, their attention and their technology goes through the roof. I know you're big on this. So freedom doesn't really come with short-term trading unless you get to the point where you've got so much dough, you got an army of people that are coding for you and trading for you and you're Jim Simons. There's quite a moat built around that style of trading when it comes to getting to the point where you could have the freedom. Whereas some of the longer term strategies, you can still code that up in an Excel spreadsheet. You don't have to look at closing prices on a daily or a weekly basis. That's a big difference when it comes to freedom. And I've always got the impression that Steve Burns, you don't talk like a man that's staring at the screen 10 hours a day, watching tick by tick. You don't talk like that type of guy.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed the lifestyle of end of day trading. Day traders have to count in the time. If they're going to spend 7, 8, 9 hours a day trading, you have to count that into your cost of business for how much are you making per hour. You can make much more hour as a trend trader at the end of the day, or a swing trader, end of day trading, position trading, anything that doesn't require your time. When you're putting an input of time in there, then you're bringing a whole nother variable of cost into the equation. I mean, you can do a lot of different things besides sitting in front of a screen 8, 9 hours a day. That's never really been my thing. All my money's been made on end of day trading, catching trends in the market and moves in one direction over multiple days. My day trading time was brief. This was not a lifestyle that I wanted to do. That's the opposite of freedom, sitting and trading all day long from a screen. The few successful day traders I do know, most of them only trade the open. They trade the first hour where the liquidity and the volume is and the move, and then they move on with the rest of their day. The irony is that the successful day traders I know do not generally trade all day and into the open and to the close. They generally have a sweet spot in the day, whether it's the first hour or the last hour, where they do the majority of all their trading. I think people don't count the cost, quality of life, if you're in front of screens 45 hours a week versus you're only doing end of day signals. So you're coming in the last hour to 30 minutes of the day, depending on what your strategy and system is. The best quality of life is when you're in a trend that keeps moving in your favor and you're just checking in going, oh, that's great. And you get your whole day to yourself.
I caught this idea, this line from your feed. I think you were quoting somebody else, but you still put it out there. It was interesting. I don't have a dream job. I don't dream of labor. That's so good. That's so good.
I love that.
I don't dream of labor. So good.
That's what's baffled me about all these protests and people that are mad and all the arguments about when you retire and like retire. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger do something they love and they're still going at it strong at 93 and 99 years old. I mean, what do you do? I do not understand going and working all day, 10, 12 hours a day. I don't understand that. I would find many ways to not do that. And I also don't understand wanting to retire at 62 or 65 or whatever. I mean, what do you do? I mean, I don't understand. I mean, that's what my game is. My games, my hobbies, my passions all merge into one with what I do. Joe Dominguez, he wrote the book, Your Money or Your Life, one of my favorite personal finance, financial freedom books. His quote was, there is no job charming. Quit looking for job charming. There is none. You have to create your own.
I find in my life, I don't care if somebody is a personal trainer or they're hustling to sell something on Amazon, or they're 20 or they're 40 or they're 60 or whatever, or they're just somebody running a fund. It's the freelancer mindset. The people that say, I'm going to figure out a way to make a buck. I just relate to those people. I don't care what they're doing. I mean, I've got a friend who hustles selling shampoo across borders between two different Asian countries, import, export, sell in the other country. It's not her main thing. It's a side hustle. But I love that. I love people that are figuring out a way to hustle an extra buck here or there versus somebody who's trying to figure out an extra buck And their extra buck is 8 hours more at Starbucks behind the counter ringing the register. I'll take the side hustle every day of the week.
I find it fascinating is really just since the industrial age, industrial revolution, jobs have really become something through most of human history. It was primarily agriculture, traders, the self-employed, the technical, the skilled, butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and they were all entrepreneurs. The whole job thing is relatively new to mankind. Retirement is even more new. Retirement, I think it was Otto Bismarck, maybe 19th century, where he instituted the 65-year-old retirement age in Germany at one time. But that was back when the life expectancy was maybe 60, 65 if you're really lucky. Now it can be 90, 95 for expectancy. So I admire people that just go out, do their own thing, create value. You get paid when you create value in whatever you're doing, or you're trading goods and services, or you're trading stocks and commodities. That's where you make money. And I just love that lifestyle. Now, at the same time, there are people that do love their jobs. We need the doctors and lawyers and professionals. There are people that do have their job that they love. Not my thing, not your thing, but there are people, and I'm happy because really the ultimate goal is happiness. What are you happy doing? And if you're happy at your job, you like your boss, you're paid well, you enjoy it, you're doing what you love, then good for them. That's just something that I'm sure both of us just are not interested in.
Well, that's the red pill and it's the blue pill. They might not ever have that red pill go down the throats. They might not never understand the joy of it. To add to your retirement thought, Paris, France, has been on fire for months, essentially, from what I understand, because the leader of France is raising the retirement age on the pensions from 62 to 64. I saw very cleverly Elon Musk said something to the effect of, is this why they're really protesting? Do you burn your country down because civil service workers have had their retirement pushed from 62 to 64? Do you burn the country down because of those 2 years? I don't know, man. If that's where we are at in terms of the vast majority of people, that's not a happy place to be.
Yeah, I mean, how bad does the math have to be for Macron to do this? I mean, he's not a mean old guy doing this out of meanness. I think they make them work 2 years later. It's obviously the math does not work to a level where he has sacrificed his political career and maybe his party's political career. But the math of having a smaller generation coming up, trying to pay for the full retirement of everybody 62 and 64 just isn't working, not from a political standpoint, just from a mathematical standpoint. And it's really, like you said, it's really disturbing what the governments around the world have promised everybody. And the unfunded liabilities are getting into the hundreds of trillions across the Western world. And how this is going to work out, because I don't know about you, but I've looked at the math and it just does not work.
You use the word everyone or everybody, but the reality is what we're really talking about are government employees because they're the only people with pensions left. I mean, if you're working at Starbucks or you're working at whatever corporate job, there's no pension. You might have some stock options. You might have some insurance or something, but the only place left where you can get a cash pension once you hit the, I don't know how early you can retire if you work for the federal government in America, 50 years old or something crazy. But this cash pension thing is a very narrow niche group of people that have that benefit. But again, okay, they've got that benefit. Man, what do you have to do to get the cash benefit in your quote retirement in America? You've got to work for the government for essentially 30 years. And back to your point, so okay, if you give up the opportunity cost of taking a job shuffling paper for the government for 30 years because you're going to get this fantastic cash-rich retirement, the opportunity cost of that is pretty steep. I mean, you could have done something else with that 30 years. I mean, I think some people really get focused on the idea of, hey, I'm going to go get that government pension and I'm going to give up 30 years of my life to get that pension. Like you said, different strokes, different folks, whatever makes people happy. Not something I can truly understand.
The French is really about that. It's really about the pension only. Then it's really could be disturbing to think if the Social Security has issues in the U.S. and that affects almost everyone. And it's really paltry retirement. Like you said, most people, very few people have pensions anymore outside of federal governments. The Social Security is such a large thing. And if that doesn't work out, I can imagine. I mean, I know every time they talk about even cutting it back, there's all kinds of problems.
I remember having a conversation in the last few months with an older American who informed me how great Social Security was because he could use his Social Security money to pay his property taxes every year. What a system.
Like a snake eating its tail.
It's a terrible system. You mentioned a second ago hobbies. What are your hobbies? I want to know. What are Steve Burns' hobbies? Because it looks like Steve Burns is producing content nonstop, or he's got an AI team where there's like an MIT team of robots at Steve Burns' house that's producing content nonstop. What are your hobbies? What do you like to do?
Holly does help a lot of that. A lot of the stuff that looks really good and genius is really Holly working behind the scenes with her different software packages. Holly makes me look really, really good and really active. She's also full time on our educational business. I'm one of the few people that you'll meet, and probably you might be the same way, is like, I don't watch enough television. I read too much. I work too much. I enjoy it. It all blurs together. And I do need hobbies and need to do things. My game is what I do. Mainly what I love more than anything is just analytics. The movie Moneyball, love the movie Moneyball. The Big Short, anything analytical based. That's what my hobby really is. And everything I do on social media, my website, trading, my e-core, everything I do really had based on data analytics. And I love going through a lot of data. The closest thing that I have to a hobby is I love the classic game of Risk, global domination game. I love that. Civilization PC game. I've played that over the years. I've enjoyed Civilization I only got up to Civilization 3 and 4, where you build your own civilization. I like the economics behind a lot of that. Reading, I mean, I read voraciously. It's one thing that I never get tired and bored of. My brand of attention deficit disorder, I have a hard time doing the same thing for more than an hour or so. I have trouble watching sports or long movies. I love doing active, hands-on things, whatever that may be. Luckily, what I do gives me endless amounts of things to work on and do in books. I've written almost over 25 books now, and the e-course and everything. So I've always got something to work on, back testing, system development, looking at expectancy, trading the last hour of the day, adjusting positions. That's about it.
As a kid, I played the board game Risk nonstop. And I play with family and friends and stuff. And I was pretty good at it. In hindsight, as a kid, I could figure out the odds pretty quick. Once you instinctively, even if I wasn't crunching the math, instinctively, you could figure out the dice rolls, and having enough armies with this particular dice roll, enough margin of safety on your armies and all that kind of thing. And then one day, years later, my mother told me, she goes, I never beat you one time in Risk. She goes, I even cheated to try to beat you and I couldn't beat you.
There's an online community now through, I think Hasbro licensed it, where you get ranked up and you play other people around the world. I did get to Grand Master of Risk at one time, so that was fun.
I saw you post something else that caught my eye. Maybe it was just a passing thought that you had. And you said something to the effect, I don't know if it was a poll that you did or you were posting somebody else's thought. You were proffering the question of the best country to live in 10 years from now. I thought that was interesting. I was like, And I'm not trying to drag you into any kind of a political corner or anything like that. I'm curious, are those thoughts that you think other Americans start to have these days? They're thinking, hey, it's always been the American dream, and this is the place to be, and there's nowhere else to be. I mean, obviously, you're talking to someone else who, right now in this conversation, who doesn't believe that the American dream is only in America. I think the American dream is actually in many other countries these days. Speak to me about that thought. Even though you're trying to stay low key and out of the fray, if you're talking about the best country to live in 10 years from now, that's something controversial, Mr. Burns.
And I look through politics lens with economics. When I look through politics, the closest I would even say to what my political stance would be a moneyball libertarian, where freedom until you can quantitatively say that this government policy is creating value for taxpayer money, creating a better civilization and better life for society. With that said, like you said, I don't think the Americans and the kids really understand what's coming at us from India, China, Nigeria, Africa. I mean, hungry. I mean, just hungry, like you said, American dream level hunger. You can see that with a huge migration coming into the U.S. right now from the Hispanic countries, where people want a piece of what we have. A lot of them have entrepreneurial mindsets. I'm stunned. I talk to Indians all the time and work with some of them in India, and how sharp and smart they are and the way their minds work. They invented math. They invented the number zero in India. The Arabic numbers really came originally from India before the Arabs spread math itself. I don't think the Americans should underestimate the hunger and desire for the rest of the world. Like you said, the Asians, the intelligence base in the Asian countries is incredible. And Vietnam is exploding. And my traffic, where I'm seeing the people coming to my site to learn and educate themselves and grow, has exploded from Vietnam, India, Nigeria. And it's incredible to see what's going on. Like you said, the American dream is turning into a worldwide dream of freedom and economic opportunity.
There is a onslaught of technical analysis books hitting the shelves of Vietnam in the last 2 years. Did not see any of this kind of stuff for a long period of time. And I actually have some of my books in Vietnamese now in the bookstores. But I'm seeing this onslaught of technical analysis books. What's really interesting is that a lot of them are like authors I've never heard of, and not even Vietnamese. There must be this demand to understand the technical analysis. Maybe some of the outside publishers are promoting some of these names, and some of it's a little too aggressive, and some of it, frankly, is just not accurate. It's still interesting to see that demand. Literally can walk into a regular mall bookstore, the center aisle, everything has to do with technical analysis. Self-help stuff over on the walls and like every other thing. The center of the store is technical analysis. This is not too dissimilar from what you can find in Singapore either. There's this real demand for these kinds of strategies that you and I have known about for a long time.
It's very interesting. I saw when I think Vietnam one week was like third or fourth highest traffic country from my website. And I thought, what is Covel doing over there in Vietnam? See Vietnam rising above other countries.
They've had a lot of growth. I mean, it's a lot of people. I mean, it's 100 million people. And look, Indonesia is 275 million, I believe, 250 million. The population of Vietnam and Indonesia together equals America. The land area of those two countries has got to be, gosh, I can't even imagine what the land area of Vietnam and Indonesia combined is compared to America. It's got to be tiny, massive populations. All across Asia, people want to know how this works. And I think, in a way, they're wise, and I'm not going to necessarily theorize why they're wise. Let's say there's a lack of trust when it comes to the news, whatever news. And they say, hey, if I don't have to know the news, if I don't have to know the fundamentals, and there's another way for me to get to point A to point B, they've jumped on it. I've seen this for a decade now, starting with China. It's really interesting. Whereas you and I both know in America, technical analysis is probably still pretty niche overall.
Yes, absolutely. Really, in America, buy and hold investing in the S&P 500 index becoming a bubble in itself. Was it the Nifty 50 back? Was it the 60s where so many people are so heavily into one strategy because it worked in hindsight, but it worked for very specific reasons. And I think there's a lot of people going to have some really rude awakenings, buy and hold S&P 500. I think if they didn't already in 2008 and in 2020, every time it just keeps bouncing back, which it has not done historically. Central banks have created bounce backs that if you go back into the 20s and the Great Depression and 29 through 1952 and the 70s, where things go down, stay down for a decade, and then inflation eats up the value. The West is really into that, and they never look at who might be behind the money interest in people staying and holding all their money in these index funds or even these ETFs, getting the fees.
I've spent a lot of time in the last handful of months. I started years ago, but in the last handful of months, even more, is diversifying assets across banks and brokers, not willing to trust any of them. I will share a story about a particular big bank / broker, and I had a decent chunk of money with them. I was opening up many different brokerage accounts. They had this option for a brokerage account. I had not used them as a broker. I convert your assets and open up a brokerage with us. So I did. Then I started saying, okay, well, I've got some money parked. What kind of yield can I get before I take a trade? Oh, no, you can't do that. What do you mean I can't do that? Well, you need the other brokerage account we offer. What did I just sign up for? They get me on the phone. And again, this is a well-known bank brokerage. They get me on the phone. I played along for 45 minutes. I figured the account was set up. We need to set up an appointment for you to talk to someone else for an hour. I said, whoa. What are we going to talk about for an hour? And we need to record this. I said, what are we going to talk about for an hour that you need to record? I said, sorry, I'm never going to work with you as a broker or a bank again. I took 95% of my money out of there. I mean, I was like, this is ridiculous. And I think this is going on right now is a lot of brokerage firms you can see are very aggressive. They're pulling in assets for cash that's parked and not being used. They're offering commiserate T-bill type money. A lot of these banks aren't offering shit. They're just ripping people off right now.
I think we're living in a time where the Fed's hiking rates, but the banks aren't paying any more to savers or any yield for depositors. We have to worry about spreading our money across multiple banks because of the risk of failure. We have to worry about the currency risk of the endless printing of currencies. I mean, we live in a very interesting time. You should have went on the phone with the broker for an hour and said you're going to record it for a podcast.
I mean, it's just wacky. It's just wacky. You just say to yourself, what is going on? I don't want to say I feel for them because they're essentially strangers. Okay, I've got some young family members and stuff. And it's like, man, if you're 20 years old today, if you're 18 today, if you're 22 today, navigating the next 10 years of their life, it's not going to be the same as when we navigated from 20 to 30. I mean, they're getting pinched. They're getting pinched.
Amazing to me is that most don't understand. They don't understand the central banking system. They don't understand the nature of our currency designed to devalue by a minimum of 2% a year. They don't understand the dangers of reckless government spending, sending out endless trillions. They don't understand that Social Security could have 100 trillion unfunded liabilities. The most amazing thing that I have yet to see, and you might be somebody that knows, the people on Twitter will gripe about the fractal reserve banking system. That was suspended in March of 2020 during the pandemic. The banks no longer have to hold reserves. They can get money over the counter and just lend all the money they want now. And they've never reinstated the Federal Reserve fractal banking system. Few people know that.
It's a weird time, man. It's a really weird time. On top of that, we go back, we can sum up since the dot-com bubble. Okay, the NASDAQ went up 100% in 1999. Go time, man, everything's going great. Then you got the NASDAQ crashing 77% till the fall of 2002. What happened then? Well, we all know what happened then. The Big Short movie. Then we get to, after the Big Short movie, the movie ends. Great movie, right? The movie ends in 2009. March of 2009 was the last edit that I made on my documentary film. From that moment, March of 2009 to essentially 2020, we had something terribly unique. They just basically said, 0 rates. Here you go. Then, once we had the pandemic, they said, here's the money spigot. We're just going to make up money. Now you can have it. Look, I can't predict what's going to happen next on a macro event or a trend, and I'm ready for whatever happens. But man, for people to think that it's just going to turn around and we're going to go back to late 2019, it's going to pick up where it left off and we're going to have 0 rates and everyone's going to have a McMansion and everyone's going to have a, quote, great job and money is going to be flowing again. I'm looking to understand how that's all going to happen. I can't predict when or why or what's going to happen next. So hence trend following is a great strategy when we don't know what's going to happen next. I know something's going to happen next. The odds don't feel like it's going to be going right back to where we were in late 2019.
The big difference, like you're saying, is people don't understand the difference, even what Volcker brought down inflation, or like you said, the dot-com, the 2008. The big difference this time, we have this inflation running wild, regardless of what they think the official numbers are. We have households still have about $4 trillion in their savings from the pandemic money with PPP loans and unemployment. So there's about $4 trillion still sloshing around with a bunch of people that did the right things or did the wrong things during the pandemic. The Federal Reserve balance sheet is about 8.5 trillion, holding 8.5 trillion in assets on the Federal Reserve balance sheet, stuff they bought, all the junk they bought in 2008 and 2020 again. Just unbelievable amounts. They're just holding it. Who's supposed to ever buy 8.5 trillion in assets from their balance sheet? The government is now on track after thinking it was going to cut the deficit, which is some celebration to go from overspending a lot to underspending a little less lot. I think it's going to miss the budget by $2 trillion this year in the federal government. Like you said, I do not understand, even if I was going to come up with a fictional narrative, where this all goes from here.
If you think about it in terms of odds, the odds of it all turning around and being rosy, which is the odds structure that most people seem to have in their imagination, those odds seem really low because, as you mentioned, the inflation happening. But I talk to plenty of people and get them on the phone, Zoom or whatnot, and people just feel no need to ever understand a strategy like trend following, or they just believe the American dream is all going to come back to save them. Doesn't feel like that time. Feels like the type of time right now to be, I'm not going to say guns and butter. Maybe it's guns, butter, and gold. I don't know. And look, anybody listening right now, this is true. Anyone listening right now, our Steve is Steve. Are we both filtering ourselves? Yeah. Neither of us see the advantage to saying too much. Not that we're going to try to make some grand prediction about what's going to happen next. We're not going to. What's the point? I mean, you got to read between the lines. I talk to a lot of smart people. They're not feeling safe, shall I say.
Another odd twist is I didn't like the odds of buying bonds that were paying such low yields for so long. Like all the investment advisors say, you hold a certain percentage in bonds as you get older, increase your bond holdings. But I never felt comfortable holding bonds. I felt much better trend trading an index of stocks than the bonds because I knew at some point they're going to raise rates. And the old bonds are going to plunge in value. You can hold them until they become valid. You can trade them in for face value. But in the short term, mark to market, the bonds are going to collapse when they raise yield. But I never would have thought, just from my own viewpoint, I didn't want to mess with low bond yields when they had, like you said, they're almost at zero rates. They have to raise at some point and crush the bonds that are paying low yields. But I never would have thought certain banks expose themselves thinking they're safe to hold all those bonds on their balance sheets, but then they plunge because the Fed rate goes up and how insolvent that would make banks. That's just incredible to me that they did see that and cause the last little crisis, which a big part of that was the drop in their portfolio values on bonds.
The thing that strikes me in the last 25 years, going back to the dot-com era, the dot-com era seemed terribly unique. It seemed fraudulent in the middle of it. I remember thinking friends and whatnot that had particular dot-com jobs, and I remember thinking, this doesn't smell right. I remember having a gut level feel this isn't going to end well. But I don't think we've ever escaped it, because all we did was kick the can down the road. That's how we got the Big Short movie. The Big Short movie, that was all created. That bubble was created to pay for the dot-com bubble. And the current bubble that we're living through was created to pay for the bubble that came out of paying down the '09 thing. It just feels like instinctively, this is not the kind of strategy that if one wants a stable-minded, stress-free life, there's always going to be some stress somewhere. If one doesn't want to cause their cells to split in half every day and to look like you're 85 years old when you're 50, it really requires a different way of thinking to navigate all of this.
People can't, like you said, think that the past is going to be the future. That's just not how anything works. History doesn't end. There was a professor at one point after the Cold War and thought that was the end of history. Oh, well, we won. America won. Capitalism won. It's great. Soviet Union fell and communism fell. And that's it. That's the end of history. Like, that is not how anything works. That's one thing to learn from the game of civilization is how things change and adjust. Powers go up and down in world history. In economic world history, what I find fascinating, I wrote a blog post recently about the Roman Empire, had a lot of the same things with the public assistance and the bread and the circuses and the Colosseum and the devaluing of the currency, the barbarians at the gates, the failure of the Roman society. It's just fascinating that these same things repeat over and over again.
Yeah, you don't have to agree with me if you don't want to say anything controversial, but the phrase public assistance, especially in America, because I know it well, public assistance is ruining or has ruined America. Because if you take a significant part of the American population, you tell those people, you can't do something, or there's too much competition, or we're just going to give you a bunch of money to do nothing, or we're going to subsidize you for whatever. If you do this on scale for decades upon decades, eventually you end up with like a zombie class of people. They're just floating through. They would listen to this conversation. I don't know what they would say. They'd say we sound like two academics. I don't think I sound academic. I think I just sound like a guy who's trying to think through life. The zombie class doesn't think through life. The zombie class is kind of like, it's going to sound bad, but if you got a dog and the can opener goes down and they hear the can opener sound, I know this from when I was a kid, the dogs come running. It seems like a significant portion of populations around the world kind of operate from the dog can thinking. And that doesn't mean they're dumb. It doesn't mean they're poor. It doesn't mean they have no money. It means they've just trained themselves to not think.
don't understand is there's never any data analytics done to see what are the unintended consequences of government policies and programs. There's like none. It's all politics going for power. It's never looked at what happened, what did this do, what good come of this, what are the unintended consequences, and they never make any adjustments. And another thing, they don't model successful things around the world. Why do they not look at countries that are successful, have almost no unemployment, and have productive citizens and go, what do they do differently, and enact programs, search the whole world and find the programs that work. And it just baffles my mind that none of that is done. That's why my thought process is taking Moneyball into the realm of politics. But people don't want analytic solutions. They want their best interests served. And that's how we get in these death spirals in countries, democracy, where two wolves are voting on what to have for dinner, the sheep's the third voter. And that's just not how a country should work. It should be a constitutional republic, property rights. Everyone should have responsibility for themselves as adults. I've never understood how adults don't take responsibility for themselves.
I think we've reached a point where, at least the way that I feel, there's enough evidence out there, if one wants to be open-minded, that the structure of government, yes, is an issue. Yes, it can be argued about. But I'm not so sure that's the issue anymore. I think if I look around the world, it's culture. It's the groups of people, the tribes of people, whoever, that have got superior cultures. And that could be because they count better, they organize better, they do whatever better. And I'm not saying any particular country or culture, but we would all be lying to ourselves if we said all cultures are equal, because some cultures just excel. They just excel. And some cultures don't excel. Now, that's about all I can say on that topic, because if I say anything more, maybe I'll get banned or canceled or something. I don't know what, but it's true. Culture is such a driving force. I see it where I'm at right now.
I think a big part of it is ethics and morals and self-responsibility.
Part of the culture, for sure. All part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what we have some problems with around the world in different countries. That's where the core of what society and the responsibility of functioning in a society, and a lot of it's social agreement where everyone behaves. And when you start having a breakdown of that on all levels and all parties, you have severe, severe problems. So I do hope that we have some great awakening in the West, and we do start going towards what the data says, and freedom and analytics and the right economic. And a lot of politics comes down to economics. Those aren't opinions. Economics of supply and demand and unintended consequences are real. I am stunned that so few people take economics seriously. They just separate economics from politics. They don't do any second, third, or fourth order thinking. They think that there's no consequences. Like you said, the ability to keep doing whatever they want to do to stay in power and kick the can. And the can's getting too big.
Well, that's a perfect place for us to put a pin in it. Two Gen X guys that are talking with half their brains tied behind their backs because it doesn't make economic sense or political sense or freedom sense to say everything one might think these days. You'll have to read between the lines with Steve and I today. Steve, I always enjoy talking to you because you're like my one conversation. Seems like we'll talk every year where we can just talk about anything. And I love those kinds of conversations.
Yeah, I enjoy them as well.
Steve, where can people find you? You're easy to find. I mean, it's actually one of those tests. If they can't find Steve Burns on anything, maybe you should go get a frontal lobotomy. Maybe you should get a brain transplant. You got a pretty generic name, really. I'm sure there's a lot of Steve Burns out there, but if you just type Steve Burns into Google, they get you. That's pretty amazing, really. My last name's a little funky and it's the search engines, it's going to pop up easier. It's amazing that you have taken a pretty common first and last name. You own it. I mean, I wouldn't want to be another Steve Burns right now.
Finally overtook us to Steve Burns from Blue's Clues.
Yeah, I don't even know who that guy is. If I go to Google right now and I Google you, it's pretty much, I think you come up first. I think I did it today.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we've both been at it. You're over a decade in your podcast, and I'm over a decade into my website.
Do you do a podcast for your business yet?
YouTube's not something I've done much of, and podcasts is something I have never done. I'm on hundreds of podcasts. If you go on YouTube and search me and interview, you'll see 100 things. I only do a couple a year now, but I've done enough.
It's a lot of work to do these kinds of things. I think you would be a really good podcaster if you ever decide that's the path. Look, I've been trying to get my butt to do YouTube work. Podcasts are easy. I don't have to look good. I can just sit here in a t-shirt and jeans, but on YouTube, got to look a little bit better and you got to comb your hair and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Hey, Steve, where can we send people? Where's the best place to go find you?
Probably my home base, newtraderu.com, the letter U, or newtraderuniversity.com. That will lead you everywhere around to my world.
Okay, cool. And of course, Amazon, again, if they can't find your books on Amazon, they probably should just get a frontal lobotomy. That's a new way to think about it. If you can't find Steve Burns' books on Amazon, go get a frontal lobotomy. In fact, if you can't find Steve Burns' books on Amazon, actually get an ice pick and do the lobotomy yourself. Straight up your nose and just poke the brain and you're fine. So if you can't find Steve Burns' books, buy an ice pick and you'll be happier. You've never had that endorsement, have you? That's a first.
No, I don't know if your editor even let you keep that endorsement.
If you do a new book and you let me endorse it, I'll do the ice pick endorsement for you. Hey, Steve, man, have a good one. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Michael.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.